Hello, NG Houston. Welcome back. Tonight we have an awesome show for you. We have Steven Adams, who I haven't known very long, but is really cool. He's going to talk to us tonight about writing maintainable code in Angular, which I think is a great topic, and this is something that I think everybody should know a little bit about. Steven, welcome. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Oh, sorry. Hold on. I forgot to mute my other. There's like a 30-second delay, and then I'm over there going, "Hello, Angie Houston." Sorry about that. Okay, so before we jump in, would you like
hmm
to tell us a little bit about yourself, or do you have a slide for
Yeah,
that?
I do have a slide for that. Yeah, so
Let's go ahead and pull up your
yeah,
screen.
okay. Right then, let me start
Inception.
showing. How's that? Is that okay?
That's perfect.
Cool. All right then. Okay, so yes, writing maintainable code in Angular is what I'm going to be talking about. So this is what we're going to go through. We're going to discuss what is maintainable code, why it's important, how Angular can help us write maintainable code, the features that it has that allow us to write maintainable code. And then we're going to have look at some examples. So I've got two different examples. One of them is like unmaintainable, so it shows you some messy code and where there's problems in that. And then the second one is more about how it's structured and which makes it more maintainable for longer term.
So
And
we're going
then
to look at like
finally,
the same example, the wrong way and then
yeah,
the right way.
yeah, yeah.
All
So they're
right.
both very similar projects. The code is different, structured slightly different, and I'm going to go through those and show you what I've done. So give you some ideas. And then I'm going to go through how you can take a code base that's quite messy and quite hard to work with and start trying to convert it into a more maintainable project. Show you some ideas I got for that. And then finally, yep, just a conclusion, and that should be it.
All right.
Okay, so
I'm gonna drop down off my video. I'll still be here, and if there's questions in the chat, I'll say hello to everybody.
hmm, cool. Right, so who am I? Yep, my name is Stephen Adams, as Bonnie said. I'm a UK-based freelancer contractor, and as you can see, I shall be available for a new project from January. So if anybody's looking for a contractor freelancer, please feel free to get in touch. I work for myself at this company, CGC Software. And I've been a web developer now since the late 90s, so that was a long time ago. But for the last 5 years, I've been working exclusively with Angular. I've done a bit of AngularJS work before that, and I've done a lot of cross-platform, full-stack development beforehand. And I've also written a book called Getting Started with Angular, and that's available on LeanPub, and it's on its second edition. Now, as we're all working from home, I have to give you a dog barking warning. This guy might be barking later on, so please be ready in case he does. Anyway, right. So what is maintainable code?
What's his name,
Okay, so
Steven?
maintainable code. What's the dog's name? It's Max.
What?
So
I would be totally fine with Max barking. I think that's allowed and welcome.
he looks adorable there, but he's a naughty little dog
He's
sometimes.
vicious. Is that what you're trying to tell us? He's vicious? I don't believe
He's
it.
noisy. He's very noisy. Anyway,
He's cute.
right. Yes. So maintainable code. So maintainable code, I say, is code that you can, when you first open it and you look at the code base, you can read it and you can clearly understand what's happening, how it, what each part of the code does. You can get a general understanding just through looking at it, what's happening, and it's easy to read. Also, I think maintainable code is code that has unit tests that solidify the functionality. This helps you to make sure that if you're making changes, or you're updating, or you're adding new features, what you're working on is not breaking other parts. And if it does, it picks up these things. I also say that maintainable code is code that you can, if you've got a bug that comes up, it's quick and easier to find out what's causing the problem and fix that. Some code bases you can spend hours and just trawling through, trying to have console log statements everywhere, trying to find out what it is that's causing a problem. So that's one thing that I think makes code more maintainable. It can easily be refactored. Again, this is all great about tests. So if you've got some code and you want to, you're working on it and you can think of a better way of doing something, you start refactoring it with use of tests. This keeps your code still running and can highlight if you've got any problems, like I said. But also, this is quite important about maintainable code. As a project's going on and it's growing, you may get new members of the joining. And if you have a more maintainable code base, they'll be able to, again, read it, understand it, and get up to speed on the project a lot quicker. And finally, one other thing I would say is maintainable code uses more descriptive function names and variable names. Example of this is like get list of email addresses is more descriptive than get data, which is something I have seen in a very recent project I've been working on. And also, maintainable code is something that you spend a bit of time before you start plotting in, start coding. You're actually thinking about the structure of it, how you're going to structure it, what the problems might be, how you're going to test it. So you put a bit of thought in before you start just diving in there and typing away. Okay, so that's what I say is maintainable code. Now I'm going to go through why I think it's quite important. So the first thing is, I've been a contractor for a while now, and what you'll find is you'll be, throughout your career, you may be going on to different projects, and not every project you join will be a brand new code base. Sometimes you'll be working on something that's been there for a while. You might be joining a project that the team's been working on, and you come along to as a new member of the team to add a new feature. When you have a more maintainable code base, it makes it easier for you, like I said, for you to work on it. So it's important to understand how you're going to write maintainable code so that you can do that for all the projects you're working on. So when other people join, or when you're working on another project that's been written quite cleanly, it will make working on this a lot easier. All applications will need new features and bugs. Doesn't matter if it's a brand new project or an old project that's been going for years. Again, sort of trying to write more maintainable code means that adding these features and fixing these bugs is going to be easier and faster for you. So that's always a good thing for projects. This is sort of related. So not only will writing more maintainable code make it easier for you to work on a project and fix a bug and add new features, it also allows you to give more realistic estimates. And the way that happens is, as you're asked by somebody to give them an estimate on how long a new feature is going to take, you can think of, how your code base is written, it's quite easy to work on. And so when it comes to given the estimate, you can say, I think it's going to take this long. With a really messy code base, you will think to yourself, well, actually, I'm not too sure what's going to happen. I think we could do it in this time, and your estimates aren't as clear. So I think with more maintainable code, you can give better estimates, more realistic estimates, which the business will like and your clients will like as well. Also, I'd say more maintainable code, due to the way it's written, using some of the things we're going to talk about later on, I think it could also make more efficient and faster running code. I think if you think about how you're naming things and the features you're using, the Angular CLI will run faster code. So I think that's quite an important part of that. And also, I think it will make you a better developer. And the way I think it would do that is when you're thinking about writing this maintainable code, you're thinking about the patterns and the approach you're going to take. You're thinking about how you're going to reuse some features. You're thinking about how you're going to test it. Thinking about all these things is going to improve your developer skills. It's going to help you use these patterns and practices and ideas. And by using them regularly, you become a better developer over time. And finally, I think by writing nice, clean code that's easier to read, I think it's going to make your colleagues appreciate your work as well, because, like I said here, nobody likes going through tons and tons of code trying to work out what somebody else has written. It takes a while. It can be a bit frustrating. So I think by having a common approach across a project, it makes the whole team work better and be able to pick up different features across the code base and work on it a lot better. So that's why I think it's important. Right, so how can Angular help us write maintainable code? Okay, so first thing is Angular gives us files for our templates, our styles, and functionality. So that's our HTML, our CSS, and our TypeScript. Each of those files, separating everything out, makes it more easier to see which bits do what. I know one of the features of Angular is you can have all that. You can have your template and your component file in the same file, but I personally prefer it to have the template file separate from the component file and the CSS file. I think that makes it a lot cleaner and easier for new people to come along and read and find out what's happening in your project.
I think you're right.
I know a lot of people, I know there's a big argument about what approach, but for me, I think that's one of the things I really like about Angular is how it separates things out.
Yeah, me too.
One other that features Angular gives us is it allows us to separate areas of functionality out. And again, this is using ng modules. So what we do is when we're adding a new feature, we will have them in our separate modules. This again separates everything out. So when we're looking at our code base, we can look at each module and you can see exactly what it does. It does the one piece of work instead of trying to do everything. Again, that makes, I think it's a good feature of Angular that makes it more easier to write more maintainable code. Like I was saying, these modules are an important part of Angular. I think they're I have seen where they're underused. So in the example I've got, I'm going to try and show you how I'm using modules to separate even out the smallest piece of functionality in my app, which I will show in a minute.
This is really an important point. If I could jump in, because I've done a lot of consulting, and this is something that I've seen over and over again. And hopefully not so much anymore, but I've seen a lot of situations where people start out with a module and then they just keep dumping stuff into it and they end up with really big modules and it becomes a problem. So it's really good advice.
I think this comes back to this whole idea I was saying where you've got to put a little bit of planning up ahead, because as you're going and you're typing away and you're filling in the code, you can just quickly throw things into that one module and it just gets bigger and bigger. Before you know it, it's a massive thing that's got everything in there.
And it's very hard to refactor retroactively once it's huge. You got to keep it from getting nip it in the bud.
So I mentioned these two things as well. I know these are quite modern, quite new, but I think these will really help. So module federation, which is what I found out from the recent Brighton and Hove Angular meetup. And we had a look at this and we saw how that you can separate your application, make a big application, but share these modules across and load them at when you need them. And I think using this kind of feature will make these really large enterprise applications be able to reuse the modules that they have. And I think that will help improve, instead of having a massive project that's got modules everywhere, you can be able to reuse them, which again, make it more maintainable. Because if you need to make a change, you make the change in one place and it's spread out across the other one. Hot module replacement, I think is another interesting new feature that's coming. I know it's available, but not by default. I like the sound of this, that how a module can be replaced without having to rebuild. So if you have a section that needs some refactoring or has a bug, you can update that module, and instead of having to rebuild everything, this should be able to replace that module for you. So I think some of the new features are coming in Angular, and there is also the strict mode in the CLI, I think, as well. And that's quite a nice feature because that will give you really, that will pick up on any little bugs that you put in there, any bad practices you put in there. I think by following that.
So with strict mode, I think they just made it strict by default, right?
Have they now? Oh, that's cool.
Is that, I think it was there and now it's there. They turned it on by, I could be wrong. I think they just enabled it by default.
That's cool.
Or because it's recommended.
Yeah, it's really useful. I think that's a great feature of Angular. And I haven't seen other type of frameworks that seem to have that approach to them. So I think that's a nice thing that Angular has. And I think that's how it can help us write better code. Another thing is our use of libraries. Very similar to modules, and I saw this in an NX talk the other day. What they were doing was, instead of putting things into modules, they're actually moving functionality into libraries. And what they're doing is, you obviously write all your code in the library, and then any fixes or updates you need, you can just do that separately and then update the library. And I think this idea of really separating things out into manageable pieces using libraries and modules is, in a way, a good way of writing this code that's more maintainable over the long term. I'm thinking like big projects and big enterprise projects. Cool. So it's got some more ideas as well. So through TypeScript, we can start to really set out a more domain-specific language. So what I mean by that is we have our types and we have our models. But by defining those, we can really say that, like, have a language that defines what the problem is this application works on. And so by doing that and making sure that you're always using that instead of not writing types and using things like any, it gives you insight into what these things are, so that when you're reading the code, you can check what the types are. You can understand what the structure of the model is that you're working in, the structure of the data is what you're working with. And I hope by having that, it makes your code cleaner and more understandable. So when you come back to doing an update, say later down the road, you come along, you can see the different types, you can see the different structure of the data, and it gives you more a clearer picture of what's happening in this application. So I think by using TypeScript to define things, I think that can really give us an insight. And like I said, this domain-specific language, so we really know what the project's doing. Another great feature I'd say of Angular is the CLI and its update feature. I remember before, when we can update things using ng update, it was an absolute nightmare. But now with this, I think we can always stay on top, always get the latest features of Angular in our code, and we can always keep updating. And that means that with the latest, we've got all the latest features, like some of the things I just mentioned, and we can use those to keep this code base that we have more maintainable, because we've always got the latest.
I really love how much the Angular team works to try to avoid breaking changes, and they reach out to the GDEs before the releases and say, please try this, give us your feedback, let us know if anything's, like, they really want to work through all of that before they release it so that they can release it and have this smooth for everybody. And I love that.
Yeah, they really put a lot of effort into that, and I agree. Yeah, they really do think about how is any update. They don't try and, like I said, they keep everything running. So no matter what version you're on, if you're on Angular 8 or Angular 11, your application should be fine. But if you're on Angular 8 and you want to start using something new to make your code and your application better, it's quite easy to upgrade. It's not a big jump now due to this ng update. So it's an excellent feature. One other thing I'd say is Angular, if I spell that right, is opinionated. It's definitely an opinionated framework, and I think that's quite a good thing. That's one of the things I like about it. It says, if you're going to build an Angular app, this is the way you do it. This is great for teams, I'd say, across projects. If you're joining a new project, you know how to write Angular. So you can find your way around an Angular app because you understand where the basics are, how a thing goes together. And I think that's quite a good feature of Angular, is the fact that it's opinionated. And I would say it's built on some really good practices on how to build modern web applications. I'll say that testing is obviously a first-class citizen of Angular. Whenever you build a component, you've got a test file written for you. You might not use it, but you have that. So testing is out of the box. It's not something you have to go and work on and install. It's there. It's very important to Angular. And by having good tests, that means you can refactor, you can update code, you can add new features and make sure that you're not breaking anything as you go. And like I just said, having tests keep this code maintainable. I do talk a lot about tests, but they're very important. And finally, I'd say one of the other good things that we have in Angular is not part of the CLI, it's not part of the code, but we have the Angular style guide. Now, I think this is a great project and a great part of the Angular docs, because it gives you like a not. I know Angular is opinionated and it tells you how to structure it, but the style guide gives you an idea that you can. These are some of the good practices that they have. They're suggestions. But if you follow that, and then you follow that in your projects, and your whole team start following that, then you're all writing them in more of a similar way and using similar practices. And I think Style Guide is definitely a hidden feature that we should really start looking at when we want to write better, more maintainable
I agree with
applications.
you
I
very
saw, yeah,
much. I feature that in the Angular
yeah,
training because I met so many senior developers and architects that like they know
mm,
Angular, but they haven't, because it's kind of tedious and long, but there's some pretty important stuff, and especially because people ask questions about how to organize their
yeah,
code, which
yeah.
is also one of the things. Hopefully, that because I think we're going to get into that,
Hmm.
how to set up the folders and everything, and it's those guidelines are in the style guide. It's pretty helpful.
I saw a video where we had a React developer and he was looking at Vue, and he was just going mad about how great the Vue style guide is, because they have their own one as well, and it's massive. It's got all about everything. And he was saying that he loves this, that they have a style guide. And I was thinking, well, Angular has this style guide. We had it for a while when we had something in Angular JS, I think. So it's definitely
Well, I
worth.
think John Papa made it originally,
Yeah, yeah,
and then he came out with these recommendations, and then the Angular team adopted the that in, which I think was awesome because it was really helpful. The community really
mm,
needed that guidance. John
yeah.
Papa came through for us.
He did, yeah.
Yeah,
And it's definitely something we should keep looking at.
yeah.
Cool. Right. So now what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to go and show you two projects. The first one is maintainablebooks.com. Um, and then I'm going to show you the code, and then I'll go through why it, what the problems with it are. So let me just try and show you. So here we go. This is unmaintainablebooks.com. It's a very simple app that all it does is you type in an author's surname, and then it search against an API, and then it should return my list of books. So it's got John Grisham twice. This is what the API returns me. And then I look on that, and then I can see a list of the titles from this author. So this is either quite a small app, but it's showing you. I'm going to show you the code, and then I can show you some of the problems that we have with that. So let me just try, and here we go. Okay, so this is the code of Maintainable Books. Now, the first thing is I'm going to start on the app module, because this is, like I said, one of the very important parts is using these modules, separating everything out. So as you can see, it's got a lot of submodules in there. It's got our components declared in there. It's got all the modules for Angular material on here. And, even though this is quite a small app, you could see this getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And as it grows, and if we don't keep this separated and smaller, this code is going to get a lot messier. So if I now show you the folder structure, so a couple of things. I've got a folder here that has nothing in it. I may have put that in there originally to put some mock data in there before I had my API. But what happens quite easily is you put in a folder and you put in some code. You don't need it anymore. So you don't, but you can easily forget to clean those out. And I think it's quite important to make sure that you're always keeping on top of the structure of your code base, making sure that you've got everything out that you're not using. And then we have this component here, this books component. Again, this is one where you're starting to think you're just writing away, and you're thinking, like, I'm going to need a page to show the books. Okay, so I'll do a quick component, and Angular creates this component. And then as you go on, you don't actually use this. You might find that you've got all these odd components hanging around that you're not using. So you've got to make sure you're on top of these type folders and this type of approach. Make sure it's all tidied up as you're going. So this is the list container. So I'll show you the HTML. So as you can see, it's got everything in here. And you can see it's got the search form, it's got the list of the titles, and it's got the list of the books. So if I go back to the site, you'll see it's this page. Again, we've got the the input form, the results, and the title. So this is all in one component. Now, as that page gets more and more complex, this code is going to get more and more in there, and it's going to become messier and messier. And then next thing you know, you've got like a 1,000-line HTML file. Even though I'm using separate files here, that is too long. So we've got to keep on top and keeping everything small. And then in here, so this is my component that does a lot of the work. So the problems with this, I'd say, are, first of all, I've got hard-coded paths in here that I'm using. These shouldn't be in here, and I'll show you where they should be really used. I've got a property called data that is used, but it's not a great name. So this goes back to that whole idea I was saying earlier on, where your function names and your variable names need to be more descriptive. Having things like data and get data doesn't help. You need to have something to say what it is, and so when I read this and somebody else read this, they can see and work out what's happening here. And then I've got another property here called got more details. Again, this doesn't have a type, so I don't know what it actually is the structure of this data. It could be anything. I don't know, so I don't really know much about them. Like this domain specific idea I was talking about earlier on, I don't know anything about that, so it tells me nothing there. I've got commented out code in here. I might have used that when I was first building this app before I had this more details button, but I don't need it anymore. So it's commented out. And I think any code that's commented out after a while, it shouldn't be there. It should be taken out. That should be removed. Also, I'm not using ng on it. And so if I'm not using it, it doesn't need to be there. I could just take that out, remove the move it from here, and because I'm not using it, so I could take that out. Another problem is, again, like I said, function name, get data, not very descriptive. I've got a subscribe. I don't really have anything to unsubscribe. I've got nothing to manage that, so that's a problem there. I've got something called res, which I see a lot. I know that might mean results, but I don't know what the results are. I don't know what they're coming at us, so I'm not too sure what that is. I've got another console log statement. That's not too helpful either. It's not really telling me what that's about. I know it's bringing data, but if it's not being used, I don't need it. And then in my more details, again, I'm building up this path, and I'm doing, again, like I said, no subscribing. I've got res being used twice. So it's a lot of problems in here that I would say are habits that I've seen in real projects, and I've seen people doing still doing some of these things. So it's not that maintainable. So that's the unmaintainable books, and you can see it's got some problems in there. Now, if I go to my next one, which is maintainable books, again, it does exactly the same thing. I'll put in question, and then I'll do a search. So this is searching the same API. Again, it gives me a list of authors. I select that, and I can see the authors. So as you can see, it's exactly the same. But if I go into my code, there are some big differences here. First of all, my app module is a lot smaller.
I already feel better looking at this.
It's just like,
because the other one was stressing me out, and I'm just sitting here, and already I'm just like, okay, this is better.
Yeah, it's so much better to have this. And,
yeah.
So I've got these two modules. I've got search and details, because what I'm doing is I'm doing two separate functions, two pieces of work. I'm searching and getting details. So the folder structure is tidied up. So I've got my details folder, and I've got my search folder. Each of those has a module in here. As you can see, a lot cleaner, a lot less stuff in here. This just has a lot of Angular material. But I could go even further with this. I could put all these Angular material modules in a custom modules folder called my Angular material custom module folder, whatever. And I can bring that in here, which will take all of these ones out and actually just have the one module in here that just loads all those in separately. So I don't have to populate everything with all the Angular material stuff that I'm using. I could take that out even further. So that's another thing I could have done. What else have I got? Right, yes. So also, if I go into HTML, so this is the HTML. It's a lot cleaner now. As you can see, everything now has its separate components. So it's all breaking everything down, keeping everything separate. I've got my search form. I've got my searching, where it says searching in the view. That's a separate component. I've got a component now for my results, and I've got one for my details as well. So everything's really separated out. I've also now, I'm using a service instead of trying to make these HTTP calls directly within my component. I've moved all that to a service because what I like to do is all my functionality, I like to keep that outside of my components. So what I aim to do is, while my my search component file here, it's only got a couple of events really, but all the work, all the searching and the API calls are in my service. And as this application grows, by following that pattern, everything's going to be in these services files, and the component's going to be a lot lighter. So they're not going to do as much work as the other one was doing, where it's doing the API requests, getting the results, looping through them, displaying them. It's not doing all that. This is all separated out. So if I go back to my service, you can see that I am returning the verbal, and I am using an interface to describe what actually is coming back. So if I click on that, and there, yeah. Okay, it's up here, my interface. So it tells me what's coming back. So it's got the URI, it's got the author, and that's an array of authors. So then I can go, all right, so what's in authors? Okay. So now I can actually go and see what I'm going to get back. Again, this is this idea of I'm building up this domain knowledge, because my interfaces are telling me exactly what the data is. So if I was a new person coming to this project, I could slowly piece together that this service is going to bring back an array, and then search results is going to contain a list of authors, and I can tell what's going to be in those authors. So that, I think, it is a good approach to do for your code. Okay, so that's my here's my service. And one of the other things I was talking about earlier on is I now also have my URL in the environments file. And I think the environments file is something that can be underused in applications. I've seen a lot of places where we may have a config file, or we may have parts of URLs sort of stuck together in services. But I think using the environments file to hold all, we can easily get these in here and then build them up, is a good approach to making yourself. You can actually see what this function is doing by its name. You can see where it's getting it from. And then when I'm using it in here, as you can see, it's getting that URL from from this file. I can see it's getting it from the environments file, and I can see what the parts of it to make up that request are going to be. So again, this language, this code is trying to be more descriptive than the last one. It's trying to tell you exactly what's happening. As you can see, it's hopefully showing you more about what's happening, even though it's quite simple. But as you can guess, as this grows and I carry on doing it like this, it's going to keep on being more descriptive, and thinking about how I'm going to write this code means that as it grows, if somebody else comes in or I'm working on it, I need to come back to it, it's easier for me to read through this and understand what's happening. And so let's have a look finally at, so this is my book details module, which I've shown. Again, this is nice and simple. I've got my models folder down here, which has all my interfaces in there. So we've got the works, which is, so in here, this list here. So this brings back an array of these things, and each of these is one of those works objects. So now if I was looking at code, I could see that what exactly is being displayed in there. So I can do that. So as you can see, this one is a lot cleaner, and as the application grows, everything's going to be separated out into its different sections. We've got a models folder that shows us, like I said, all the different parts of the application and how the data is set up. everything's loaded in its own module, so that makes it cleaner. And like I said, that module is a lot smaller. So that's what I'm trying to show you there is the two approaches. So I've got one where I've actually thought about how I'm going to structure it and how I'm going to, what I'm going to return, how I'm going to call these things that I'm returning, how the data is. And the other one where I've started thinking, okay, so I've got to get some data and display it on the screen. So I've started hacking away and not really thinking about it. And it's going to start looking more and more maintainable and messy. So hopefully those two examples have shown you some of the ideas I had. Okay, so I'm going to go back to here and carry on going through this. So let's just go through what's in the problems with unmaintainable books. Again, yep, as we saw, using one module, has everything in there, can be really messy. Variable names weren't clear. We had things like data, more details, data. That wasn't very clear what it was. I didn't know what was going on if I came to this. Function names weren't descriptive. Get data never helps anyone and should never be used. There were no tests. So if I did start making changes as that application had grown, I started adding new features. I don't know what I've broken. So tests weren't missing, so they need to be in there. The component had too much functionality in it. It had functionality in there, what was called an APIs, that should be separated out into services, which, if you think about it, when I was saying earlier about libraries, if you put more and more services, you could actually turn it into libraries, which will make that even more separated for you to work on and keep maintained. So you can start moving these things out to libraries if you're using services. There wasn't any types. So again, I don't know what the data was. I did using any was never any good. There's a pun there. There was commented out code, and I think that should be removed. So there's a few problems with that. And then if I went through maintainable books, which I did, this is what I think is the improvements I've made. So here we go. Like I said, I had everything in submodules, which helped separate the functionality. I had tests and test spec files in there by default. So as my code grows, I'm writing more tests. As I make any changes, the tests are running. And if I break anything, the test will let me know straight away. I was using, as I showed you, I was using types, and I was defining what those types are. So you saw I had author and works, and they clearly defined what the data was. The variable names were a bit more clean, better meaning. I had function names as well that were clearly saying searching for or fetching data, things like that. More descriptive names. So they were easy to understand. Like I said, moved all the functionality into a service instead of a component. I think that's quite a good practice to take, is to move everything. When you're writing big components, anything over like 600 lines, then is when you start to think, actually, I could really start moving some of this out into a service. And what I'm trying to really show is this separation of concerns. So through the modules, the services, I'm moving everything into its smaller pieces that are easier to work with. And so by keeping everything smaller and doing one thing at a time, as the application grows and the code base gets more complex, it'd be easier to maintain because I know this piece of code just does this. I know this piece of code just does that. And I think this separation of concerns is quite an important feature for maintainable code. Okay, so now the last part. Is there any questions? I think at the moment?
Not so far. We do have a couple people watching, so I think we have time for questions. So if you guys want to ask any questions, just drop them in the chat, and then we'll get to them here in a minute.
Great.
I don't think it's so confusing so far, though. It's really clear.
Oh, glad. All right. So you may want. So this, what I'm going to go into now, is how you can take an existing application that you may work on that has a lot of code, and you want to start trying to convert it into this more maintainable approach. And the reason I got the rugby goal is, if you know rugby, when you kick the ball over, you convert it. So that's why that's there. There you go. Little rugby joke there for you. Okay, so what can you do? Well, first of all is tests. So if you're working on an application and you have to start and you think, well, this is really messy, what can I do to start with? Well, the first thing you can do is, if there aren't any tests, start writing some tests to just cover what's there. You start small, you start building it up. And then what that allows you to do is, when you move into refactoring, you have your tests that are telling you any changes you're making to convert this code into a more maintainable code base if it's breaking anything. And as you do more tests and you convert more code over time, your code base gets more becomes more maintainable, and you know that any changes are going to be picked up. Any bugs or any problems that happen are going to be picked up by tests. Like I said, they allow you to do this refactoring safely, so you know that you're not breaking everything. Second thing you can do is, I would say, is start to move things into modules. As you saw, I had in my more maintainable example, I had one for searching and I had one for listing books. If you have an application that's quite large and you've got a section that, say, has user admin or search user details or something like that, and they're all in one module, you might want to separate that out to two parts. So you can make a new module for user admin. That could be probably broken down into more separate modules as well. And so you have then you could do a new module for searching, and you can start moving your code with your tests and refactor it into these modules, which separated it out, and which would, over time, again, make things clearer. And then you can move further from that. You can start thinking about using libraries to move code into these libraries that, again, will be separate. And like I said, there was an NX talk I saw where they're trying to encourage this approach, where the functionality for this app that they were talking about was separated into libraries. And by doing that, you can really work on each library. And if you want to make an update, if you want to fix something, if you want to add something, you're just working on that library until it's ready. Then you can bring it into the main code base for everybody else. And it's easier to maintain separate libraries than one massive piece of code, one massive application. You can also start to go through your code and replace any examples of the use any. You can start creating types to give you this domain-specific language. So this won't really affect much, but it's more useful for, I'd say, when you're reading the code, you can see what it's returning and what data is being passed around. If you've got something that's looping through an array and you don't know what that array has in it, if you put the types on it, it will give you more of an idea of what the data is, and that helps making it over time, gives you that clearer model of what the data is that's going throughout the application. And then once you've got tests and you've got your tests running, you can start to refactor these function names. So if you've been given a piece of work to add a new feature, you've got a piece of code, you can, as part of that, you might want to start to rename some of these variable names into something more descriptive, more function names. You can do this as you're going instead of as a whole piece of work. It's quite useful, quite a quick win, making things more maintainable. Some other ideas is, one of the important things is to not think that you can just convert an enterprise application over days from something that's a big, massive mess of code into a more maintainable separation of concerns application. It's going to take time, but you can do this slowly over time. It just takes one sprint at a time. So don't expect to really rewrite your code straight away. It's something that can happen over time. But if you start adding these things and encouraging them with your team members, over time your code's going to become more maintainable. One of the other things you need to do is the business needs to be, they need to buy into this idea. Because if you say to your project manager or your client, okay, I'm going to do a bit of refactoring, and they say, okay, what's that mean? And you go, well, I'm just going to rename these variable names into something more descriptive. They'll be like, well, why are you doing that? That makes no benefit. But if you say, well, I'm going to start writing tests and I'm going to start refactoring this code so that later on it's going to save more time with our estimates. We're going to have tighter estimates. We're going to be more on time when we deliver code because it's cleaner, it's easier to work out what's happening. fixing bugs is going to be a lot quicker. It's going to save them time and money, and businesses and clients love that. So that's a good feature, and it's a good thing to get them bought into this idea that you're writing, what you're doing to your code base to make it more maintainable is a good thing for them as well. And if you do have resistance from your managers and they say, well, I'm not too sure about that, where you're giving your estimates, I would say you can say, well, this might take me 4 days to do. But if I tell them it's going to take me 5 days, I can spend that 5th day on some of this refactoring and on writing tests, just to, over the long run, slowly start changing this code base into something that's more manageable. So I think
somebody explained this to me once, like like feeding vegetables to children. Like if you cut it up in small pieces and sneak it in with their food. So like if every single project has time for, cleaning everything up, and you just like start budgeting them, like put it in, like sneaking the vegetables into the children and just like do it in a little bit, like it does help. It's like a little bit of tech debt for each sprint, maybe.
If you have a whole sprint of tech debt, nobody likes that idea. But if you do just once, 1 day a week, a sprint, or just a little bit over time, it can make a big difference. But if you have to keep on doing it, I'd say. Another thing I'd say is before, when you get, say you start your sprint and you've got a new feature to do, it's quite easy to just dive straight in there and start typing code, trying to get it done as quickly as possible. But if you spend just a little bit of time thinking about how you're going to structure it, how you're going to test it, what you're going to do, are you going to write services, what's the types you're going to need, start thinking about those things just before you dive into your code. And then when you have all that planning up ahead, when you start writing your code, you'll be adding these features in there, and it makes it the code that you're writing there and then more maintainable and easier to work with. So when I was showing those 2 examples, the first one was me just hammering along, just writing it quickly as I could. The second one, I actually stepped back and think about, well, how am I going to structure this? What type data is it I'm getting back? What's the API you're returning me? How am I going to convert that into a type? What's a good descriptive name for this function? Those type of things. Those are the questions you can ask yourself before you start. So to recap, do you get that? That's a terrible joke. Sorry. Make use of Angular's features like modules and libraries to separate out this code, to make it more smaller pieces but separated. That helps make it more maintainable. Write more readable function names and variable names so they're more descriptive. So when somebody's reading your code, or even if you come back to your code like a week later, it's easier for you to read and understand what's happening. Write tests, because they cover us for our refactoring and making sure that anything we're doing is not making massive breaking changes. And then again, the style guide, I think, is something that we should all have a look at. If you work as a team and you want to use a common approach, look at the style guide, see what it's got in there, and start following some of that. And like I said, spend time just planning your code before you start writing it, thinking about these different ideas, and try and get buy-in from the business on what the benefits are of this writing maintainable code, how it's going to help them in the long run, how it's going to help the business, how it's going to help you and them in the long run. And I think that is it.
All right.
I think, hang on, I've got one more slide that has links on it.
Hold on.
Let me just put that on there. Some links. Let me present that. Okay. So some links. I got the 2 repos of the projects that I showed. Style guide again. And we've got the Maintainable podcast as well, which is a great podcast, as you know, Bonnie, because you were on it. It gives you.
He asks such good questions. I love that guy.
Yeah,
thank you for the
it's
introduction.
really, really useful. It's not. Yeah. It's not. It's mainly like Ruby and Rails developers, but I find that what they talk about is very similar things. They're always saying having tests, working out how to structure your sprints, having time to do some maintenance on your code. And so there's some really good interviews and really help a lot of information in that podcast, so I highly recommend that. There's a great course on testing from.
I love Shai Resnick. He is
Yeah.
such a good teacher, and he's hilarious.
Yeah, he's got a
Yeah.
great course on testing. So if you're not too sure about testing, I recommend this course.
It is very, very comprehensive.
Yeah, it's a good course. And finally, there's a great video by Katerina. I can't say her second name, but what she does is she goes through how to use solid principles in. I think she's doing. I think she's doing it with. Might be PHP, but the ideas are very. They can be applied to any language, and there's these solid design principles. I think by following those, it gives you a good approach, and your code will be more manageable over time. And so that's quite a good talk to go through and watch. And she's got some good ideas in there. So
if you send me these links, I'll put them in the description down below, and also a link to your book, because I think that this was a really great demo, and I think these all were very solid suggestions. And so I am convinced that you know what you're talking about, and everybody should buy your book. And some lucky team can hire you if they're quick.
Yes.
This is actually, we're filming this in early December, so we'll see. We'll keep in touch with you. And I hope, so this is actually your first. I hope it's not your last. And I really appreciate you coming on and sharing with us how to create maintainable code. Thank you very much, Stephen Adams.
Thank you.
All right. Oh, wait. Connie wants to know, do you measure performance gain after refactoring? Oh, that's a good question. I always forget about that because I've refactored sometimes and I forget to go and do the, did you do any performance comparison between the two?
Yes, you can do. Yes, you've got the monitoring tools and performance tools in Chrome, obviously, and you can really drill into those to see which parts of your code are slowing things down. And then I think you can take those snapshots, and then if you do it again after you've made your updates, you'll see, I think by refactoring, you'll be able to see how the performance is improved. And I think you should definitely see some of those things. I haven't done it on the project we've been working on, but I would say that, just making, so if you write the code so it's easier for the TypeScript compiler to understand, it's not going to have to do so much work. So I think it's going to be more efficient. So I think we'll find it should run faster.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
And Connie has a really good point because I like to use Perfume.js for this, but it could, there's different ways to do it. But I really like to get a screenshot of this component takes this many milliseconds to load. And then if you get that screenshot before you make any changes, then you clean it all up and you do that performance refactor. And then you can act, because managers love data, actual hard numbers and before and after pictures. So I think it would be really interesting if you do this talk again to see if you can grab the performance, how long it takes, and see if there's actually a difference between the two. I bet there would be.
Yeah. I think it's a great idea. I'll do it.
Yeah. All right. Good idea, Connie. Yeah, all right. We're at the top of the hour. Thank you so much again. That was awesome. Thank you, Connie, for staying up late to watch, and everybody else in the chat who watched. It's always good to see everybody. Okay, so obviously they can find you. You're very active on Angular Nation, so anybody can reach out to you on Angular Nation. And then what's your Twitter? Are you on Twitter too?
Yeah, it's Stephen R. Adams. So it's Stephen with a PH.
Stephen R. Adams. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again, and hopefully we will see you again. Thanks everybody.
Bye.